Welcome to the 700 Club, and thanks for joining us. Our first story is all about the empty shelves that we're all seeing in stores, record-breaking backlogs at our ports, and a severe shortage of truck drivers. The breakdown in our supply chain is hurting the economy.
And if you haven't already, you're about to feel the pinch in your wallet. So what steps is the White House taking to break the logjam? Senior Washington correspondent Tara Mergener explains.
The White House and businesses from coast to coast are warning the supply headaches will get even worse as the holidays approach and demand gets higher. And this year, prices will no doubt be higher, too. To help get things moving again, the president says he's brokered an agreement for the Port of Los Angeles to become a 24-hour, 7-days-a-week operation.
You're hearing a lot about something called supply chains and how hard it is to get a range of things from a toaster to sneakers to bicycles.
Big retailers and shipping companies are also pledging to expand their hours. President Biden meeting with Walmart, UPS, and Home Depot.
This is the first key step toward moving our entire freight, transportation, and logistical supply chain nationwide to a 24/7 system.
LA and Long Beach ports account for 40% of shipping containers that enter the U.S., both suffering from record-breaking backlogs.
What happens with the railroads in the Midwest and warehouses across the country affects the number of ships that everyone sees out here in the harbor.
High consumer demand, plus a shortage of truck drivers.
We're about 3 hours late.
All this is jacking up shipping costs.
A year ago, it cost $1,900 to use a container. Now it's costing $16,000 because they're using the container for storage on the ships and in the ports.
And adding up to higher prices at the checkout line.
They are passing all these expenses on to the consumer. They have no choice. So we haven't even begun to see the inflation that is going to come from all of this.
Factory workers and other supply chain issues are also keeping many items off store shelves, with shortages expected to continue through the holidays.
To keep your shelves full, we have to order 8 weeks in advance, 8 to 6 weeks.
Basically, what I've been telling people to do is start shopping early, even before Halloween.
But the Treasury Secretary is telling Americans not to panic.
I think there's no reason for consumers to panic about the absence of goods that they're going to want to acquire at Christmas.
The latest inflation reading shows it edged up again last month to 5.4%, with the biggest increases in food, shelter, and gas. Now, according to a bank rate survey, 89% of Americans now notice these higher prices at the cash register, and 66% say they are hurting financially because of them. In Washington, I'm Tara Mergener, CBN News.
Well, there's nothing quite like a member of our government, and this one, the head of the Federal Reserve, telling us not to panic. It just induces panic when you hear that come out of her mouth. This is unbelievable what's happening in our economy. And it's not just the goods in the store, and it's not just the empty shelves. It's not just the supply chain. If you go to the gas station today, get ready for some sticker shock. And I've got some bad news for you. If you depend on natural gas for heating, be prepared to pay a lot higher rate coming this winter. Natural gas prices have increased 100% since January. So that's a doubling, and it seems like there's more to come. It's good news. The administration is paying attention to it, but is it too little, too late? And how can you get rid of this kind of backlog? And how does the federal government induce people to drive trucks and deal with supply chain issues? This is a really incredible situation we're in, and get ready for more inflation. In other news, is it safe and effective to mix and match COVID vaccines? A new study suggests it is, with some boosters more effective than others. John Jessup has more on that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. John?
That's right, Gordon. As you were just saying, a new study from the National Institutes of Health says mixing and matching vaccines does appear to be safe and effective. The study suggests that those who received the Johnson & Johnson vaccine benefited more from boosters made by Pfizer and Moderna. It also found those who were vaccinated with Pfizer or Moderna vaccines and took boosters from other companies still showed a strong immune response. Officials caution, though, the study, which is yet to be peer-reviewed, is based on a small sample size. An FDA panel meeting today and tomorrow will consider authorization of boosters for both J&J and Moderna. Well, here in Washington, Israeli Foreign Minister Yair Lapid met with Secretary of State Antony Blinken Wednesday. His top priority, the ongoing threat from Iran.
Every delay in the negotiations brings Iran closer to a nuclear bomb. The Iranians are clearly dragging their heels, trying to cheat the world, to continue to enrich uranium, to develop their ballistic missile program. If a terror regime is going to acquire a nuclear weapon, we must act. We must make clear that the civilized world won't allow it.
Now, Israel disagrees with the Biden administration's efforts to restart nuclear negotiations with Iran, but Lapid says Israel's security is something both nations view as a top priority. The two diplomats also discussed progress in the Abraham Accords signed last year. Well, 1 year after those accords were signed, Israel's Knesset is moving to make sure those agreements survive the test of time. CBN's Chris Mitchell reports from Jerusalem.
The establishment here at the Knesset of the Abraham Accords caucus is the next step in solidifying the relationship between Israel and her Sunni Arab neighbors. Caucus co-chair Ruth Wasserman Lande says leaders across Israel's political spectrum are uniting behind the accords.
And as you could see, you had people from former government, current government, the fact that this is a real national interest of the country and of the region. And I pray to God that this is just the beginning.
Bahrain's ambassador shared his country's support for expanding and protecting the accords.
It can become the mechanism that enables us, despite the differences, to put our hands together and work towards one goal: a safer, more prosperous and secure Middle East.
The event brought together many architects of the accords, like Jared Kushner, who says the peace agreements have started a ripple effect.
It's spreading throughout the Middle East. It's spreading throughout the world. Muslims in Indonesia, Muslims in Saudi Arabia, Muslims in Malaysia, Muslims in Pakistan. They're seeing that Israel is not what they've been told it is, and they're seeing that Israelis are welcoming their Muslim brothers, and they're seeing that there's a lot that we could be doing together.
This Bahraini shares a unique perspective after working with Israelis.
This is my first visit, but it's not my first interaction with Israeli people. I'm a humanitarian, so I do a lot of work internationally, and luckily enough, I had the pleasure to meet a lot of Israelis around the world who are volunteering with me as well. And to me, they're great people.
U.S. representatives pledged support to advance the accords.
The Biden administration now continues working to expand normalization efforts and to deepen Israel's existing relationships and to bring new countries into the fold.
Former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu credited the Trump administration for changing policy towards Israel and Arab leaders.
They understood now that the road to Washington passed not through Ramallah, but through Jerusalem, because that was the American policy. They said, if you want even better relations with the United States, then make peace with Israel. So the change in American policy was critical. I have to say that without it, you could bake the cake, but you can't finish it. You can't put the topping on it without this crucial change.
Netanyahu added, while Israel and these Sunni Arab nations face a common enemy, he's optimistic about the future.
I believe that if we continue to move in this direction, and if we don't fall into yesterday's traps and the failed policy of the past, our grandchildren will look back at this moment and say that the peace of Abraham brought the sons of Abraham together.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, the Knesset, Jerusalem.
Thank you, Chris. Gordon, it is amazing to witness this undeniable reshaping of the Middle East.
Well, it actually has gone against what our own State Department was saying for a very long period of time. And I have to congratulate Ambassador David Friedman. I think he was one of the principal architects of this wonderful Abraham Accords, and also the transfer of our embassy from outside Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, something that the foreign policy establishment said was never going to happen. Let's go back to the Clinton administration, 1996. That's when Congress passed a law mandating that the U.S. Embassy be in Jerusalem. But it had an out within the law that if the administration thought for security concerns it wasn't advisable to do it, you could kick the can down the road. Well, Clinton kicked the can, Bush kicked the can, every president since kicked the can. And then finally, under Trump, the embassy moved. Now, the prediction from the so-called experts was there would be an eruption, that there would be bloodshed, there would be all these riots, and the whole Middle East would go up in flames, all this. None of that happened. The same thing with the Abraham Accords. John Kerry, our Secretary of State, said you cannot have piecemeal peace. You have to first solve the Palestinian question, and then you can broker peace with the other nations. Well, the Trump administration turned all of that around with the Abraham Accords, and now we're seeing the fruit of it. And it's wonderful to see. If you think peace with the Palestinians is possible, please think again. They've been offered a state every single peace deal since 1948, and they've never missed an opportunity to miss an opportunity. They have no intention of establishing a separate Palestinian state. Their every attention, their every statement since 1948 has been to drive the Jews into the sea, to abolish the state of Israel. Let's take them at their word, and in that, isolate them from the international community. Israel has a right to exist, and let's stand with her in that right.